What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Battlefield 2042 beta and actually comparing the game on last gen against the same game on next gen to just show you guys all of the differences and similarities between the two. Now, there are a few quick things to mention. Firstly, this is not meant to be a whole console war type situation where we say one platform is better than the other. I play games on PlayStation, Xbox and PC, and quite frankly, I do not give a shit which platform you think sucks or which one you think is the best. This is not a comparison of the platforms, it's a comparison between generations. So let's just leave the fanboy comments at the door. Video games are fun regardless of the platform, and I'm not 12 years old, so I can't be bothered with the whole console war nonsense. Now, the gameplay you're going to be seeing throughout the video will all be from either the Xbox Series X or the PS4. I am yet to play on Xbox One or PS5, however I think the PS5 version will be very similar to Series X, and the Xbox One version will probably play very similar to PS4. So we do at least have comparisons between both generations despite being different platforms, and at all times throughout the video I will have a little icon up in the top left of the screen to show what platform you're currently watching. I do have some PC gameplay, however I won't be using that in this video as I actually just don't think that's fair for the PC version of the game, simply because I could only record in 1080p on medium settings, and even though it actually looked really good still, I just don't think that is fair for PC, so this is just going to be a console generation comparison for the most part. Now, we're going to be breaking this video down into three different sections when it comes to the comparisons. Firstly, we're going to be taking a look at the difference between the player count and the size of the map. All of this information is already known, but I'm just going to be showing the actual difference and how it actually plays in game, as the map is actually quite different. Secondly, we're going to be taking a look at the graphics and the frame rate and all that kind of thing, essentially the aesthetics of the game, and seeing how each version or each generation stacks up against the other. Lastly, I'll then compare the actual gameplay in terms of gunplay, movement, all that kind of thing, so that you can actually see the difference in how the game actually plays regardless of player count or graphics or any of that. We'll simply just compare the feel of the game itself. With all of that being said though, guys, I hope you enjoy the video, and if you do end up enjoying it, then do consider subscribing to the channel with those notifications on. But without wasting any more time, let's get stuck right into it. So like I said, we are firstly going to be comparing the player count and the map size, as this is easily one of the biggest differences between the two generations. Last gen, so PS4 and Xbox One, only allows for up to 64 players per lobby, while next gen, so PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and PC all allow for 128 player lobbies instead. Because of the difference in player count, the map size is also very different as well. I'll show you guys a direct comparison here of the overview of the map, and as you can see, the next gen version is vastly bigger than the previous gen version, adding, I would say, almost twice the amount of playable area on next gen. Now, this does kind of suck. I'll show some gameplay of the area that you actually can't access on the previous gen, and this area of the map is honestly so much fun. So it really does suck that previous gen players won't be able to access this area, but I do understand why they had to do that, because otherwise the map would be far too big with only 64 players, and obviously it would affect optimization as well. So it is understandable why they had to do this. This does make the previous gen version of the map a lot more linear as well. I found it almost looks like a breakthrough or rush map when you look at it from the spawn screen, just because it is all kind of like in a line rather than spread around the place. But I also didn't find that to affect my actual enjoyment of the map. Aside from those negatives of not being able to access the other half of the map, I did still really enjoy this smaller version, and it felt like I was actually in the action more often than I was on next gen, and I do personally think the, ratio between player count and map size felt really decent, at least in my playtime so far. So like I said, it does suck that the bottom half of the map isn't accessible to previous gen players, but gameplay and intensity wise, you guys honestly shouldn't feel like you're missing out, because the gameplay and the action that takes place on the smaller version still felt really solid, and I almost had as much fun on PS4 as I did on the Series X. Now, moving on to the graphics and the frame rate and all that good stuff, there is definitely a very noticeable difference between the frame rate and the textures and all that, which is to be expected. Of course, it is a 7-year-old console versus a 1-year-old console, so yeah, that was always going to be the case at the end of the day. On my Series X, I haven't really run into any performance related issues just yet. There are definitely some little texture popping issues or visual bugs that do need to be fixed by launch or shortly thereafter, but overall the game has been running pretty smoothly, to be honest. It looks great, and I'm getting 60 frames a second pretty much all the time as far as I can tell. So yeah, no complaints really for me, at least not yet anyway, on the Series X. Now, on the PS4, you can definitely tell that it's only running at 30 FPS, and you can clearly see a little bit of a difference in the textures and the render distance and all that kind of thing. It objectively looks worse on the PS4, but again, that is to be expected. And aside from the 30 frames per second, I do still think it looks pretty decent on previous gen in terms of the graphics. It's almost unfair to compare when you directly see one matched against the other because it just makes previous gen look so much worse, but when I was playing on the PS4 earlier today on stream, it never felt like it looked bad or anything. My only issue with it was the fact that it runs at 30 FPS. Whether that'll be the case at launch, I have no idea, but I do assume that will be the case. But yeah, if you only play on PS4 or Xbox One, then I don't really think that is too much of a worry, whereas if I constantly switch between the two myself, I'll obviously notice it, and I'm sure it will be, slightly annoying, but most players won't be switching generations each time they play. Frame rate aside, the textures definitely looked a tad worse on last gen as well. The render distance was noticeably different, and when it came to things like, say, the rocket blowing up or the tornado, I definitely noticed a difference in those as well. But again, all of the graphical side of things is definitely expected because they are on such different platforms at the end of the day. Now, lastly, moving on to the comparison between the gameplay of each version, so the gunplay, the movement, the hit registration and lag and all those sorts of things, the difference felt pretty much exactly as I expected it to. It 100% felt smoother and more enjoyable to play on the Series X. I felt like the gunplay itself was slightly better, however, I actually couldn't really put my finger on why that was the case. One thing I noticed was the difference in the look and the feel of the hit markers between the two versions. It felt much like crisper and more reactive on the Series X, whereas on the PS4 it did feel like hit markers weren't as responsive, and sometimes the kill indicator wouldn't pop up instantly and stuff like that, which, even though those are more related to the UI than the gameplay itself, it did give the gameplay a different feeling overall. I also felt like the recoil of the weapons felt a little bit different between each version. I don't know if you guys will actually be able to pick it up just from watching, but when I was playing, the recoil and I guess the recoil and firing animations of the weapons did feel slightly different, almost more, I don't know, arcadey or something on PS4, but again, I can't really put my finger on it. But yeah, I definitely did feel a difference between the two versions when it came to the gunplay. Not that the PS4 version was necessarily bad, but just more that the Series X felt a lot smoother and more responsive, I guess. In terms of the movement though, it felt essentially identical between each version of the game. I really enjoy the movement so far in the beta, as it feels really nice and fast and it feels very responsive. I personally can't stand shooters where you kind of just don't feel like you're fully in control of your player, but in the beta so far it does, at least for me personally, feel really nice and smooth on both platforms, and I honestly did not really notice much of a difference between the two in terms of movement. Now, as for the more, I guess, server related stuff like the hit reg and the lag and all that kind of thing, once again it did feel a little bit smoother on the Series X, which again, not to sound like a broken record, is expected. I felt like I was hitting shots more comfortably on the Series X and they were registering a bit cleaner and more consistently, whereas sometimes I might have landed a few shots on the PS4 that kind of didn't feel like they actually landed in game, if that makes sense. And so yeah, I think that once again comes down to the difference in the hardware, and although the Series X felt much nicer, I don't think I'd go as far as saying that the PS4 gameplay felt bad, just noticeably of a lower quality than next gen. Overall, across all of the areas that I've covered in the video, it was very clear that the next gen version of the game, in terms of the scale, the graphics, the gameplay, it was definitely a better experience for sure, but it wasn't drastically better either. Like, I wouldn't give the Series X version a 10 out of 10 and then the PS4 version a 5 out of 10 or anything like that. Both felt pretty decent to me, but the next gen version did just feel nicer, which in reality it should. Now, I know a lot of you guys might be watching this video to sort of gauge whether or not the previous gen version is worth getting, and I would definitely say that it is, but the safest option is to honestly just download the beta for yourself, which is only around 10 gig on last gen, and just give the game a go for yourself. Keep in mind it is a beta and it's definitely got some issues and there are some annoying bugs here and there, but it's not the final representation of the game. So for me personally anyway, all I'm looking at in the beta is the fundamental aspects of the game, not whether there are bugs or whether it's completely balanced or anything like that, because those things can be fixed much easier than having to completely redevelop the core mechanics of the game. So give it a try and just see how you feel about the gunplay and the movement and stuff like that, and the rest of the game will be cleaned up over time, whether that's by launch or probably more than likely about 3 to 6 months after the game is out. My final thoughts though are that both versions of the game felt pretty much as I would expect them to feel considering the hardware differences, and while the next gen version is objectively a better experience, if I only had previous gen capabilities, I think I would definitely still be very excited to play the game, so hopefully that sums it up nice and easily for you guys. For any of you who have played on multiple platforms or generations like myself, please do leave your thoughts down in the comments as well. My experiences might be totally different from from everyone else's because we are all going to have very different experiences of the game, especially in a beta. So I'm very keen to hear what everyone thinks so far. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you guys are new to the channel, then consider subscribing and turning on those notifications. If you guys want to support the content that I make here on YouTube, then consider becoming a channel member. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you all out there on the battlefield.